All right, what's going on, guys? It's Brocco here with Uncharted Territory. It's 3:54 p.m., about 6 minutes until the bell. Day three of our post-market recap. Did the first one on Wednesday. We actually live traded today on Twitter and YouTube for most of the day. Took off around, I believe, maybe 1 p.m. Eastern time. Market was a little bit slow, and there, frankly, just wasn't much to do today. I'm going to keep this one pretty short. I don't really have much to say today. After all, the indexes are closing pretty much right where they closed yesterday. So, not much of a change. A little bit of movement in some individual stocks that we'll talk about, but this one will be pretty short. The rotation continues. We saw some pretty big strength in the Dow this morning on kind of what I consider day two of this breakout move. Obviously, financials continued, XLF getting through the 50-day. XLV just monstrous follow through. This is not an area of the market I'm involved in right now, or that I usually don't really care to participate in. But really nice action there for anybody that got involved. That's a really sick move on XLV. Really nice continuation, closing at high of the day. Gold, silver were really strong today as well. Silver's almost back. SLV's almost back at the highs, which I had some doubt on these coming into some lower high territory, which they still could be, but very powerful move today on a lot of volume. So still seeing money kind of rotate out of tech, even though, tech hasn't even been hit that hard really. Maybe just some like previous kind of momentum leaders that have come off the highs pretty well. The Qs are still, only a couple percents off the all-time highs. So not really getting hit too hard, but you are seeing money start to, get excited in some other places of the market. Semis, still hanging in there. This was going to be, I was watching SMH pretty close today because, it is in this like really tight pattern. This did show some relative weakness yesterday versus the NASDAQ, which I was a little bit concerned about. I think NVIDIA was leading the way down. There was some talk around SoftBank selling their stake and whatnot, but this got a little kicker candle type gap up today and really had potential to push out. AMD was leading the charge with that news this morning, continued kind of talk around that analyst day yesterday or whatever they had. Really powerful move. This actually traded a ton of volume today. 165% of its average daily volume, did 102 million shares and pushed out, and it held up today. I mean, a 9% day, that's pretty big for this name. That's like pretty much a double ATR move for this name. So awesome to see. I really wanted to see if some other semis would try to push out on that, but not really. SMH closing pretty much right where it opened. But this is nice because we got a really, really tight day on this. And when you get like a really tight day after a 20 EMA holding a higher low like this, it sets up for a pretty big decision to be made, right? So I think we're going to find out pretty soon whether, this SMH or, SOX, whatever, want to push out of these patterns or if they're going to fail and come back lower. So really tight day today, sets us up for some range expansion, I think, pretty soon. Yesterday was a pretty quiet day for the most part, with the bank holiday and all that kind of stuff, pretty low volume across the board. And I actually thought today was going to be a little bit more of a decision day, but indexes, Qs flushed out a little bit. We saw some pretty strong divergence between, Q, SPY, IWM, Dow, and, just came back pretty much flat. We're closing a little bit down on the day. Sort of a weird indecision type candle. We swept over the range a little bit, came back in, held the 20 MA. Mags a little bit weaker. We actually bearish engulfed on the day. This is we kind of noticed this pretty early. This is just kind of your Mag 7 ETF. So we saw some some money coming out of Mag 7 and piling into some financials and healthcare names this morning and stuff like that. So trying to reclaim the 20 MA close, not quite, but came down into this gap here. We'll see what this does tomorrow, but that was a little bit of a red flag this morning. I bet ETHA crypto. I actually thought that these were going to rip a little harder off the lows. I thought Ethereum was going to, come all the way back to this base pretty quickly after that capitulation. Granted, it did make a pretty big move off the lows. I mean, I believe this undercut the 200-day and after hours on Tuesday. So about an 18% retrace. And, now they're just kind of going sideways. I bet down 1.3% today. TSDR has this kind of classic saying he likes to say when you get a situation like this, it's like, bear flag or base, right? Are these like trapping lower and going to find some more buyers and put in a higher low? Or, are these, setting up for potential another leg down or maybe an undercut of the Tuesday 11.4 low. So we'll see. I'll be watching ETHA around here because I do love trading Ethereum. I am interested in this. especially if we can higher low. It is showing a little bit more strength versus Bitcoin right now, which I do like to see if I'm going to look for a trade on this. Yeah, going to keep an eye on this at the end of the week. Nothing actionable on it yet at the moment, but we'll keep some eyes there. Um, we were keeping an eye on some of the price action leaders this morning and kind of how they acted around some pivots as they tried to push out with the Qs pretty weak. And, the issue is when you get a market like this, it's pretty dull and, momentum's really dried up a lot. Even the names that are really strong and showing a lot of strength and look like they want to continue, they can fail pretty hard and result in some nasty shakeout bars or just rejection bars at the highs in general and end up forming these little like double toppy kind of structures versus against the previous high. Let me think of an example. For like Lemonade this morning, I know some people were keeping an eye on for this to push out of these two tight days at the high. And it got through the HVC today and just kind of got stuffed for this little double toppy structure and definitely flushed out some chasers, about a 10% fade from the highs. EUSC was another one as well. They had a tight inside bar and tried to go at the open and just got absolutely stuffed. I mean, that's a 18% intraday fade off the opening high. That's not easy to sit through, whether you bought it today or whether you got in yesterday with some small size or you bought the breakout on 11.7. I mean, if you took this through the previous day high, you were in the red for a little bit just today, which is not easy to deal with. That's a pretty big move and a pretty big P&L swing. So, names like this can definitely be vulnerable to some really aggressive sellers, especially if the broad market can't, kind of gain any real momentum in any direction. So, a couple other ones, Crowd got hit today. This is a group that's been leading. ZS as well, down 4.5%, big bearish engulfing bars. So not a great sign because this is a leading group. D-Dog as well, down 3.5% today, but right down into the HVC and definitely has some support here. So probably going to hang out around here a little bit if I had to guess. Oracle, man, this thing's still getting crushed. I mean, not good to see. You really want to see this bounce just for the kind of health of the broad market, right? This is one of the bigger, tech names and, Climax on this huge volume gap up back in September and just hasn't broken that high since. And, I've seen a lot of people trying to pick a low on this and, have not been successful. Maybe this wants to retest the 200-day. Didn't even see many buyers or any support at that gap fill for like about 1 day, and that's about it. And just continuing to fade. Really would want to see this, find some support at like, 218, 220 down in this area. Just for the broad market, that would be a good sign to see this stabilize just a little bit. To see this, this extended down in a short period of time and seeing the selling pressure that it continues to see is definitely a little bit concerning still, and a little red flag. Some of your, previous momentum darlings from the last cycle, your NBIS, had some little bit of day two follow through this morning on the green to red move through that $100 support level. This had earnings yesterday, had some crazy roller coaster moves on earnings yesterday. I mean, this was all over the place in pre-market, sells off 10%, 12% bounce off the lows to new highs, then fades 13% into close. And then you get the follow through today back to the bottom of the base. It is into a pretty big level and may see it stabilize here. But, not the action you want to see in one of the, the market leaders of this recent run. CoreWeave as well, obviously all the way back down to the bottom of the base, down 3.5% today. Pretty big spot for this name as well. Not good action there. Irene and CIFR are, two I'm going to be watching pretty close as they come into the 50-day. These were truly like momentum leaders and sort of had like, they didn't really put in a specific like episodic pivot day, but they really acted like an episodic pivot as far as the theme developing and the narrative. And, these names were just so strong on the way up, even throughout some like sell-offs in the market. These held so strong. They always had that like kind of beach ball action off the lows and just ripped so hard off support. And that's a really great sign of relative strength. So this is like, this is a group that I definitely don't want to see showing relative weakness, especially Monday, right? We had that huge gap up on Monday and the Qs up 2.2%. And, Irene was down 3.5%, and CIFR was down 5%, and that was a little bit of a red flag on these, and told me that they're likely going to go visit the 50-day, and which they are right now. No position in these, not really looking to get involved right now, but really want to see these start to build out and hold the 50-day moving average, or that could be a much bigger red flag if these just kind of go bidless through the 50-day, like you saw like the rare earth theme or something like that. Highly doubt it, but but these are definitely important names to keep an eye on. But that group is definitely still weak, and growing weaker by the day. Want to see these find some support. Three names I was keeping an eye on today in another kind of group was like Tesla, Palantir, Hood. Wanted to see these hold the 50-day as soon as I saw tech kind of start flushing out this morning. And Tesla's sitting right at the 50-day. Not much great action off the lows. It's just kind of hanging out around down here. But, this has been building higher lows in the base. So this 50-day is going to be like a line in the sand, right? Pretty strong bounce off the 50-day back here Friday into Monday. And we'll see if these high, consecutive series of higher lows can hold, and if this can continue to build out up the right side. PLTR, really volatile action after earnings all over the place. I did love the rebound on Monday and how strong this was. Came down at the 50-day, reclaimed Monday's low. Not looking terrible. Not the volatility you want to see. You don't want to see a 5.5% sell-off on an inside bar after Monday's recovery, but that's just maybe kind of the nature of the market, the tape we're in right now. So we'll see. Nothing too concerning there. Hood actually put in a really nice hammer candle today and reclaimed the 50-day. Was losing it this morning, so really nice reclaim there. And that's really it. That's really kind of the names I'm paying attention to. I've taken one trade this week, and it was about like 0.25% of my account, and I closed it today. So I've literally done nothing all week. And, I know there's certain traders that, even during the rough tapes or the choppy markets, like to continue to get reps on stuff, whether it be pullback buys, breakouts, earnings gappers, all that good stuff. They like to just continue to get reps and keep contact with the market. And I'm like that to some extent. I really am having trouble finding things that get me excited, which if I can't get excited about a trade or find any sort of conviction, it's really hard for me to like want to get involved. So I've just been mostly cash this week, just kind of hanging out, waiting for, a better period, whether that's now or a month from now. I mean, who knows? The big lesson we've been kind of talking about, today, and that's kind of been circulating just in my head is, it's a great quote TSDR likes to say all the time, where he says, you can lose a lot of money in a market going nowhere, or you can lose a lot of money in a stock that's just going sideways. And, especially if you haven't reduced size, right? That could be very dangerous. And right now we're just kind of in an undecided market, right? You're seeing rotation into some other areas, which is healthy. That's great for the market. And tech is kind of just undecided right now. I mean, to me, this candle today is literally just like indecision. Close down 0.08%. So literally completely flat. And to me, market just doesn't know what it wants to do. Apparently there's, we could have CPI tomorrow. I'm not fully even sure. We'll see in the morning what it looks like. But that could be a potential short-term catalyst to finally get some things moving. We do have this bearish gap up on the Qs, 627 to 632. That's, going to be a big spot to watch. I actually thought we were going to try to push into that today, but sellers just hit this right at the open, mainly kind of in large cap tech. So we'll see. My best case scenario, like I talked about on Monday, would be that we backfill some of this gap more and find a higher low somewhere. But so far we're kind of just going sideways and we're just kind of stuck here. So we'll see. I don't really care to have any strong opinions or strong thoughts right now. Using right now to just, do some studying, build out some model books, and still scanning and, still, refining the watch list and seeing, where money's going and how some things are holding up, because, even in a choppy market or, market that's just going sideways, or call it a dull market, it is still important to, be scanning and watching the market. I think Dan Zanger has a great quote on that. He says, even diligence during choppy markets is part of good timing, right? You completely ignore the market during time like this. You get into bad enough of a drawdown, it's becomes sort of necessary to just step away to protect yourself and protect your portfolio. But if you've been able to, manage your drawdown and you're doing okay, it's important to stay in tune and keep scanning and, continue with your routine day to day. Because that's part of good timing when the market's ready to go again, which I can tell you in my experience, it can happen pretty quick. The market can just flip the switch like that. Usually you'll start to notice before it happens. You'll get some signs, whether it's, you get a little bit of traction on a couple trades, or your watch list quality starts to, just get better in general. You have a longer watch list, right? I think I posted on my channel today, I'm not really interested right now in fighting tooth and nail to find that, one or two outlier setups that are going to work each day, like, open, saw some continuation, or, whatever it may be. I'd rather, just kind of sit tight and, wait for a period where, my watch list gets to the point where, I'm having trouble figuring out like which stocks I want to focus on because my list is so long with so many quality names. So it could be a little bit of time till we get to a period like that, but I'm happy to start taking some reps soon and taking some small trades, trying to get traction if some things start to interest me. But right now, that's just not the case. So I'm going to do a deeper scan tonight, and then obviously get to the desk pretty early tomorrow. We'll have the pre-market stream up live at 9 a.m. On Twitter and YouTube for those that want to tune in. We're going to talk about some setups for the day and what we're looking at. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and see you guys next time.